Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Gaming and Esports room for Beyond 2020. My name is Raymer Rietkerk. I'm the head of esports here at Newzoo. I will be acting as your moderator slash panelist for today. Joining me are Jeremy Jackson, who is a market analyst with a focus on games and VR, and Luca Chiovato, who is a market analyst with a focus on streaming and esports. So we have most of the bases covered in the industry here today, which is great. And so we're going to have a conversation generally, taking your questions, as well as a few we prepared, just to kind of add more color outside of the presentations you guys have seen today around the industry, or all of the industries, as you'll soon discover. As a as an opener, just to get everyone acquainted with the basics, JJ, can you take us through the differences between gaming, games viewing, live streaming, and esports? Like, what makes them different?
A lot of things make them different, but I guess they all kind of exist together, right? I mean, gaming is kind of the foundation. Gaming is any game that you would play on your phone, on a console, on a PC. It's the entire industry surrounding that, and then of course, game streaming is kind of the presentation of those games to an audience that's not playing it to a live audience. And generating engagement there and kind of generating in other entertainment medium, while esports is more of kind of like a competitive scene which develops around those video games, and it has its own organizational structure, and it kind of exists tangentially and separately from the games themselves, but they all kind of circulate value within those three kind of separate sectors.
Cool. Makes sense. I guess one thing you touched on is games viewing. I think for a lot of people, especially people who are not as sort of familiar with the gaming space, I think the idea of watching people play games, just especially not in a competition format, but just to watch them, may seem a little strange, right? So I guess I'd be curious, Luca, first, like, what are the platforms that they watch on, and why do they watch? What is the motivation to do so?
Yeah. Whenever I get asked about, like, from my parents or their friend, like what I'm doing for work, and I say that I specialize in live streaming, they always ask me the question, why would you watch somebody else play video games where you could be playing the game yourself? An answer I find very fitting is, first of all, to describe live streaming by comparing it to the live streaming options that social platform offer. Think of live streaming as a Facebook stream. So you could tune into some friends of yours performing any action, and you could comment on that action and interact with your common friends, and I don't know, make fun of him, encourage him. So that's basically what live streaming is. What we've seen with our research, and my master's thesis was actually on the motivational live streaming, of watching live streaming for people, is that people want to watch live stream primarily because they want to be together, because they want to be in a community, because they want to interact with the streamer that is playing the game. And that is mostly the primary reason why we saw such a spike during this pandemic. We saw the increase of 70% year over year in live streaming hours watched on live streaming platforms. And you asked me what the platforms are, and the main platforms for the Western markets are Twitch.tv and YouTube Live. You're probably familiar with YouTube, and it's basically the same thing. You have YouTube channels, but those same YouTube channels can upload live videos, so they can interact live while they're playing games. Mostly, yeah.
So just real quick, can I tune in, actually, like, hone in on something you said? You said one of the main reasons people want to watch people play games is that it's a social driver, right? They want to be together, is sort of what you said, right?
Yeah.
I guess, I think to a layman, the idea of watching games, okay, but so it's like TV. So I don't think TV is generally thought of as a super, I mean, with your friends, if you're sitting on a couch, sure, it was a super social activity, but I think a lot of live stream watching happens independently. What do you mean by it being a social driver? How is it social?
Well, it's social because next to the person, when you tune into live stream, it's pretty much like the video you're having right now. So there is us on the side talking, but at the same time, you have a chat on the right side of the screen where you can interact with the people watching the same content that you're watching. So on the side, yes, you can tune into, you can focus on the person watching, but you can also entertain conversation with those people. So you could talk basically about whatever, about your day even. And one thing that we see in live streams and is that so the bigger a stream is, the more fast the chat moves. And in that case, the social aspects are less prevalent. But when we focus on smaller streams where there is 20 viewers, it's usually always those same 20 people tuning day after day. So it becomes like a ritual where you tune into the stream and you interact with the streamer, but at the same time you interact with the people that tune every day in there. So you develop friendships, and sometimes you can even bring the relationship outside of the live streaming platform. On platforms like Discord or even in game, you can start meeting players that watch the same game and start playing games with them.
So sort of to summarize, well, for the big streams, it may act a little bit more like television. I mean, there is a chat, but it tends to have a lot of noise. What you're saying is in smaller streamers, smaller communities, well, smaller streamers, you end up building communities around those streamers in that stream, and these people all get to know each other, play games that the streamer plays, etc. Right?
Yeah.
Cool. Oh, that's super interesting. Well, I guess while we're on socializing as a topic, JJ, one thing I wanted to touch on with you is sort of how has gaming evolved as a means to socialize during the pandemic, right? Does gaming also play a role, or is this almost exclusively a live streaming thing?
No, gaming absolutely has been evolving for a while to play a role, and it almost seems like the stars really aligned with some of the game releases or the gaming initiatives this year, because we saw Fortnite. To people who don't know, Fortnite is a massively successful video game from recent years, which has developed almost into its own kind of platform. And on Fortnite, they've stepped away from the typical mode of basically a shooter battle royale, and that they now include these kind of public social spaces where different events are held, such as concerts. So there was a massive Travis Scott concert, lots of DJs performed within Fortnite, and these are generating massive amounts of traction. I mean, you have a concert, which, typically those are big concerts, are reserved to even 50,000 people if you're lucky. Here they're attracting millions and millions and millions of players within the game, but then on top of that, they're actually being live streamed from hundreds of thousands of different accounts, and then on those different accounts viewed by millions of people as well. So the games medium is also becoming the social space, and the pandemic really accelerated that. We saw other games like Animal Crossing, and I mentioned this in my video, but basically Animal Crossing became this supplementary space for a lot of social interactions and events that people were typically holding physically, but weren't able to anymore. So things like weddings. I know that in the U.S., the presidential campaigns focused on these game spaces as well to kind of promote their policies and gain traction. So they've really become these incredibly social spaces, and I think a lot of brands are taking note of this as well.
Cool. No, it's super interesting. Yeah, it's been pretty wild to watch the pivot that's happened in the course of the pandemic. I guess, Luca, I have a question for you from the audience, which is, what are the likely impacts of 5G on esports? Do you expect it to change the esports game much, or do you think it's not super pertinent?
Well, so when we talk about esports and we think about the most successful esports titles, we've seen that, for instance, on the viewership side of esports, what drove the most viewership are those games like League of Legends, Counter-Strike, Dota 2. And the real driver are the biggest events that happen on a live stage. So of course, 5G wouldn't have a play there because everything happened on a LAN connection. But I could see how 5G could make it easier, at least for instance, qualifier, which are often online setting. 5G could make it easier for people who don't have a stable landline connection. But what do you think, Raymer? Because I see esports as mostly happening offline in live settings, but I could see why it could help if you don't have a landline.
Yeah, I think for the actual execution of 5G of esports, I don't think 5G is super pertinent. I mean, maybe you could see edge cases where it helps in amateur and kind of bootstrapping events. I think the reality of 5G is that what it does do is it hopefully, if the technology lives up to this promise, brings high-speed internet to a lot of places that can't have it. So I would say the impact of 5G on esports is going to be less directly on the execution of the events, or even to a degree the consumption of the events, and it's going to be more focused on expanding gaming and mobile gaming and even PC gaming to a degree, depending again on how 5G manifests, expanding that whole audience, right? And we're already starting to see some of that development happen, and so that may jump into overdrive competition, competitive play, and therefore esports in some developing markets, for example. So there's opportunity spaces there with 5G. I don't view it as directly correlated, but I view it as pertinent. Yeah.
Well, we are also seeing the rise of mobile esports as well.
Good point.
Especially in those developing markets. Do you think that that it could accelerate kind of how many people are able to access those more competitive titles?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was trying to illustrate, was that the audience is going to grow for these more competitive titles, and that's going to help grow mobile esports in these regions. And that's exciting. And to go on a little tangent on mobile esports, just for the audience, because I think it's an interesting topic for people interested in gaming and esports. Mobile esports has basically exploded over the last 2 years. I think 2 years ago, the esports hours viewership were non-existent. Now titles like PUBG Mobile and Garena Free Fire, they sit in some of the top most watched esports games worldwide. And most of this viewership is actually driven out of not the traditional esports markets, which would be Europe, North America, China, Korea, and actually are driven through developing markets where young gamers there are playing these games competitively. And their natural follow-on to that is esports. So they're kind of filling a void in the market where there wasn't a lot of esports in some of these markets. It's starting to grow. And 5G, as you mentioned, is a great accelerator for that, because all of these people, they may not necessarily be able to afford sort of high-end PCs and stuff, but they all have phones. And when 5G gets rolled out, it's only going to improve the connectivity and reliability on those phones, which is going to improve the experience playing these games. Cool. So I guess JJ, just a broad question for a second. What kind of impact has the virus had on the games industry?
A big one. The impact has definitely been kind of two-sided. We're constantly saying that it's a bit of a double-edged sword, right? But basically, we've seen mostly really positive impacts, right? So engagement has never been higher. We are seeing headlines still to this day of record-breaking numbers on specific platforms such as Steam, as well as within games themselves. We've seen publishers reporting their best financial quarters in history, and the games industry itself added more than $15 billion of revenue on top of our initial estimation for 2020. Which is insane. But on the other end of the spectrum, a lot of the development efforts in gaming have been shifted to remote work, and that works a lot. If you're managing Excel files or PowerPoints, everything's already in the cloud anyway. But a lot of game development is really hands-on, and that shift was a lot longer. Production of things like physical copies of games had to take a hold because factories were closed, and especially these really massive video game studios like Nintendo had to delay a lot of their projects because their IP is simply too valuable to be worked on outside of their headquarters. So what we'll be seeing, and what we've already seen a bit of, is pretty significant delays in some of the games that are coming out, as well as some of the production for physical copies of games, and we'll continue to see this for a while. And I think one of the kind of more interesting aspects is that we're really seeing game development potentially shifting in the way that it happens to be kind of pandemic proof in the future.
Cool. No, that's super interesting. Actually, speaking of the pandemic, if we change the focus a bit from the development and the kind of supply side and move it a bit to the demand side. I don't know if you've done any research at this point about perhaps audience demographic shifts during the pandemic. Do you think, but would you say, on a more speculative basis, I guess this could go to both of you for games and for esports respectively, do you think there are shifts in terms of like the age or gender makeup of gamers due to the pandemic? And if like from new audiences adopting maybe, and if so, do you think they're permanent?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that from like a more broad demographic, like a motivation perspective, we're definitely seeing more people who, didn't really prioritize games. Maybe they played a while back and then stopped playing, or maybe they played mobile games. We've seen these people kind of become more committed to games. Same with some people who never even touched games getting interested in video games. As a means to socialize, or as a means to kind of escape, or because they've kind of had a desire to try something new. So we're seeing more people move into the game space or kind of level up. So go from very casual play to maybe investing a bit more into a new platform to play on or something of the sort. And we may see some jumps in maybe the older age demographic moving in. And kind of using gaming as a way to entertain themselves when the lockdown orders were in place, and when they may continue to be in place in many markets. But we'll probably see a lot of that popping up as we conduct our surveys for the next year.
Yeah, we've also seen older demographics tuning more, for example, on live streaming services. And I think an example of that would be that, for example, now the biggest category on Twitch, which is in the West, is the main platform for live streaming, is that nowadays the main category is just chatting, which is a category which is not related to gaming. But we are seeing more and more people that just want to use live stream as a mean to be together and to communicate together. And for example, I was tuning is that, for example, during the presidential election, there were programs that were covering the election live in this new way of covering election, which is not the traditional of just watching a TV channel. And I've heard many people of saying this is actually more entertaining. This is more interesting compared to just watching a TV channel. And then we have some classic audiences from the sports. Sports events have been halted globally, and we had seen spikes in viewership, for example, for sim sports. That were probably older demographics, but they gave a try to watch the virtual events. Now, I'm not saying that all this new viewership coming because of the pandemics and because there were no better options is going to stay. I actually think that as live events, sports events will slowly start to happen again. I see most of the audience shifting back to the live events. But I also think that it was a good thing for awareness, and I also think that there will be at least a minor percentage that will stick to live streaming.
One of my these are all definitely good points, and one of my favorite anecdotes I always like to tell about the esports audience is, when sports stopped, there's quite a few people out there who have sports gambling as a hobby, and the place they went when they could no longer bet on sports was esports. So we actually saw esports gambling numbers just go through the roof, like exploding, because these guys wanted to bet on some kind of competition. They couldn't do it on sports anymore. And so the joke kind of, or not really a joke, but I suppose probably somewhat true observation, is that one of the unexpected side effects of this pandemic is that we now have a cohort of middle-aged sports gamblers who've become esports fans very unexpectedly. So that's that's, you know, the world moves in mysterious ways. Cool. So changing topics a bit for a second, JJ, what is one of the most important trends we're seeing in gaming today?
I think that one of the most important trends, and we've kind of touched on this already, is this kind of trend of games becoming more social. I think that this is really something that it's kind of a phenomenon that's really taking shape and will influence the games industry for years to come. And you know, ever since games first started to become multiplayer on a more accessible level, people have been, you know, obsessed with that feature, right? I mean, LAN parties, people used to carry these massive computers across you know, their city just to go play multiplayer games with their friends. And now it's transcending beyond that to even just, you know, being able to pop in, hang out with your friend in a virtual space and consume different kinds of like content, like a concert or anything. And you know, as games become more accessible, and we have new generations like Gen Z taking shape and consuming social media in a way different way than we ever did, we will definitely see this as becoming a big driving factor behind games in the future.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I guess this kind of sits between the two of you, but I'd be curious on either or both of your thoughts, which is how would you predict the growth of VR use in esports over the coming years? Do you expect there to be VR esports? Do you expect it to take over esports? Do you think it's niche? What are your thoughts? Either one of you can start.
VR is interesting, and I'll be the first to say, like, I am a massive fan of.
I think we might have just lost Jeremy.
Yeah, I think he just turned off his PC.
It looked like he pulled the cord and disappeared.
Oh, he's back. He's back.
No, I was just trying to pull out my VR headset to show that I have it ready to go. But I will say the one thing about VR is it can look quite ridiculous. And I think you know, if you've seen VR esports, you know, there's a lot of interesting aspects to that, but there is a lot of clunkiness that's left to be seen within VR. And I don't think that it's as one-to-one as a lot of people assume, right? I mean, what's popular in traditional esports is shooters, and then more kind of like strategy-based games. And there aren't a whole lot of strategy-based games. And when I say strategy-based, I mean like MOBAs, like League of Legends or StarCraft. There aren't a lot of those in VR. And it's not really the medium for it because it's very top down. But then the shooters are very fun to play, but they're also pretty clunky compared to how fast-paced popular shooters are now. So I think that there is space for kind of competitive, engaging content that's more native to VR to work as a competitive medium. But I also think that, you know, as things like cloud gaming and being able to use the network to accelerate visuals instead of hardware exclusively, we might see viewing competitive content within a VR headset as something a bit more interesting. But that's really something that has to develop, and I think it does have to develop very natively. So it's not going to be this like one-to-one, like very equal transition that we're kind of seeing with mobile as a platform, just pretty much being able to adopt directly from what PC has built up.
So rather than it being the medium for the esport, it's a medium to watch an esport, for example. It's what you sort of see in the short to midterm.
Potentially, yes.
Is that, Luca, do you agree with that? Do you have additional thoughts?
I was thinking right now, it just came to my mind, is that if esports actually doing the esports in VR, they could potentially, of course, on the long term, but they could put again into the esports, the physical aspect of competing, because one thing you often hear when people are saying, okay, do you think it's a sport? It should be considered a sport. It's not a sport. They're not athletes because they're not actually exercising or displaying like physical strength. Do you think that putting back the physical aspects into the esports by, I don't know, performing, I've seen a shooter, a competitive shooter competition, and they were like crouching, they were proning, and you need some sort of physical ability to be able to endure a competitive match. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, the legitimacy quest is going to come on its own. I think we've already made, if I think back to when I started in esports 5 years ago, which to most industries means I'm still a rookie, but in esports means I'm an ancient old man because it's a young industry and it moves fast. Like if I look at the difference between the legitimacy, acknowledged importance of esports 5 years ago versus today, I think it's already come leaps and bounds. You look at the number of non-endemics involved, companies you might have never expected. I mean, Louis Vuitton did a massive thing last year, and they're still a partner for Riot Games, right? And Louis Vuitton, and now because Louis Vuitton did it, Gucci did some stuff. I think one of the other guys did some stuff. Versace, maybe, I don't remember, but definitely Gucci and Louis Vuitton. These are not brands you would normally associate with esports or gaming, but it sort of shows that I think that, you know, whether or not the IOC, and we can get into them later, looks at esport, this legitimacy trend is happening anyway. So I don't think that is going to be a good driver to like, it's not going to be a good driver for VR adoption. I think VR adoption for esports has to exist on its own and has to serve as a engaging product without any other concerns. If people want to watch it, it'll be there. The legitimacy will come, and maybe that will be an added side benefit. But I think JJ's point in terms of there is some VR esports. I've watched a bit of it. I mean, I think it's a cool initiative, but it does look very strange. And the other thing too is that VR, like esports, is very much about precision. It's about agility and precision. And one of the things that VR still lacks is a really deep level of precision and snappiness. I have a VR headset as well. I think JJ was a key influence in me getting one. I do really like it, but when you use it, you know, in most games, it's just not that precise. It takes it, like, there's a shooting game, it takes a few tries to grab the clip. Some games have solved for it by making wide acknowledgement, like wide recognition areas with your head. I'm getting very technical, but the point is some games have solved for it a bit, but it's still an issue of just snappiness and precision. And that would be necessary for any esport to happen. So I think the technology needs to get further ahead before we even think about VR esports as a real substantive thing. But, you know, never say never. Again, if you think 15 years ago, esports, Twitch didn't exist. Esports was LAN events. Like, the industry changes so fast and is still so young and so fresh that a lot of things can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And just as a final point, I think that the pandemic's lockdowns have also accelerated adoption of VR. So we're really seeing the VR industry kind of kick off into a second, much larger wave than the initial one, which kind of died out in 2017. And we're seeing much more accessibility in VR. And so that industry has to develop. It has to develop, and it needs to grow into the direction it's going to grow into. But there's, of course, room for competitive gaming because humans are super competitive.
Cool. Yeah, I fully agree. And we see it everywhere. Wherever there's competitive gaming, esports follows as well. So, Luke, I sort of touched on the Olympics briefly, but I know there's been sort of Olympics has played hot and cold with esports, right? So you had an expo that was going to happen around Tokyo, and then it wasn't going to happen, and then certain country level Olympic committees started to make acknowledgments towards esports, and then the IOC said, no, esports is not a sport, it will never be a sport, so help me God, I will die on this ground before maybe I'm exaggerating a bit, but you get where I'm going. So I guess the question is, first, like, what are your thoughts on this? Is this important? Do esports need the Olympics? What do you think?
Or is it the other way around? Good question. It's certainly an interesting topic of conversation. I think that there's certainly many benefits that esports, and as well as drawbacks that esports will get should they be classified as Olympic sport. First of all, I think that I need to make a clear distinction of what we mean by esports. And esports is whatever game. It can be Tetris, it can be whatever game, but mostly it's a competition. So you have to play it competitively, and you will get a prize if you win the competition. But then we also have, so you have a video game at a base, and then you have a competition on top of it. But you can have video games, for example, League of Legends, who are MOBAs or strategy game, and then you have the FIFAs, then you have the Formula Ones, which actually mimic real life sports. So on one hand, you could see how, for example, playing FIFA competitively could be added to the Olympics, but then you have games like Counter-Strike, where you have to shoot people, and you think, okay, but why should I add it as a sport? This is not a sport. And then, so we have that for first. And then surely there could be benefits, for instance, for athletes. Should esports be considered as real sports? Of course, I cannot speak on behalf of every country legislation, but I know that, for instance, for my home country, Italy, if esports were to be considered as an actual sport, then the life for esports athletes would be much easier, because from a legislational point of view, it would be much easier for them to receive contracts and all that stuff. But of course, this is different in different parts of the world, because there's like Korea, where for esports athletes, it's much more advanced compared to another place in the world. And then there's this. You could say that if esports were to be accepted by the Olympics, then they would be legitimized. But honestly, I would argue that esports are already mainstream. They don't need to be legitimized. Or what I'm saying is that the legitimacy of esports is built by the people who watch it. And the people who watch esports aren't the people who watch the Olympics. They are very two different demographics. So yes, it could help build legitimacy, but it would do so in the wrong audience, or in an irrelevant audience. What do you think, Raymer?
Yeah, no, so I think the mainstream one is always a funny thing. I was doing a talk at the Italian Football Federation, and one of the questions they asked me was, what is it going to take for esports to become mainstream? And I said, we're talking about esports at the Italian Football Federation. Is that not enough evidence that it is already mainstream, right? This is not a niche indie group we have here. So, if it was not mainstream before 2019, I think the pandemic really brought it to light. It really became center in a lot of the conversation, especially when sports and esports stopped. I think you have a good point, and we'll talk a little bit about sim sports, all that kind of stuff. But I think you have a good point on the people that it has legitimacy from the people who watch it, which is that if an esports audience wanted to be part of sports culture, they have sports for that, right? One of the things that draws the esports audience to esports is that it has a culture that is built for its audience. It's an esports culture. It's not the same as a sports culture, right? It has a slightly different attitude. If I was to describe it, I'd say it's in some ways a little less serious, a little more focused on memes. It's a little more conversational, right? Everyone who's in esports is very directly in tune with their fans, right? They watch what their fans say. They talk to them on Twitter directly. They talk to them on public forums like Reddit. So it's a very conversational thing, and it's a very, very cultivated by its audience. So in that sense, becoming more sports to fit the requirements of sports and chase some holy grail for some sort of mainstream legitimacy or some from the IOC you would sort of be betraying some of the core value that it has. I think the reality is that legitimacy is conferred by the people and the people who watch. And as long as brands keep coming and Mercedes comes and BMW comes and Louis Vuitton, as I mentioned, comes and DHL comes and every Domino's comes, basically every non-endemic, I say non-endemic meaning non-gaming brand, every non-endemic brand under the sun is coming to esports, right? And if all of these companies agree that it's legitimate and that it's worth putting their money in, and all of these people are watching and saying it's legitimate and it's a reasonable competition to follow, I think it follows that the legitimacy is there, and either the Olympic Committee can come along or it doesn't. I don't think it matters too much for esports. Yeah.
And of course, we also have other problems, which are maybe even more important, is that, for example, nobody holds the intellectual property for football, or nobody does so for basketball or for sumo. I mean, the rules for those games are very well established. But for example, how would you combine having a Olympic committee with a game where the IP is held by the publisher that created that game? How would you combine what the publisher wants to do, what the Riot Games that holds League of Legends want to do with his own game with the AOC?
Yeah,
that's a whole other problem.
It does prevent a real challenge, right? In terms of how that's going to look, is there going to be revenue sharing? It creates real business complications for the IOC, which may also in part provide to their reticence towards getting involved with any kind of esports, purely based on the relationships and complexity that's going to be required due to having underlying IP owners. So yeah. No, that's cool. And I guess we touched on it a bit, which is sort of Sims sports, right? And we had this moment where sports stopped, and suddenly, there's kind of two parts of this, I guess. Which is, first is the esports side of it, because we saw a whole bunch of these traditional sports organizations jump over and do esports, right? And then also maybe just a general viewership side. And I guess on the one half, what happened? What is the impact? What do we think it means for the future? Does this mean sim sports are now esports? And maybe even to open a little color on where sim sports sits in the overall esports ecosystem, just to provide some color there as well.
Yeah, as I confusedly already said before, is that so at the base we have games, and the games can be of different kinds, and of course there could be football games, and in that case, when the games is a simulation of a real life sport, then in that case that game would be a simulated. Then you have the esports. We could be either League of Legends, so that game is an esport, but then you could have sim esports, and that would be Formula One, the game, so it's simulated, played at a competitive level, so with a competition which at the end of which you would win a prize. So we have games, we have sim games, we have esports, and we have sim esports. On live streaming platforms, we have seen during the pandemic huge spikes in sim games viewership, which means that people, as sports events were halted worldwide, we have seen the NBA getting interrupted, we have seen Serie A in Italy getting interrupted, football everywhere getting interrupted, and people wanted to consume that content. So what they saw the possibility of consuming that same content or a derivative of it on live streaming platforms. So with our game streaming tracker, we saw huge spikes in viewership, for example, of Formula One games or iRacing, which is the platform for driving esports. And we saw increases as like 120% over March to April in 2020. And I wanted to highlight that this is not esports viewing, because, for example, on the esports part, they haven't organized actually esports events for simulated games, for sim games. So we've seen the audience that was trying to look into alternatives on how to satisfy their needs of
So wait, Luke,
food.
I have to jump in here. You're saying that sim sports did not have esports events? Because couldn't you argue like the F1 Virtual Grand Prix was an esport event? I mean, it was a competitive game.
I would say that more than an esport event, it was a showcase event, because you wouldn't win money. It was a competition, yes, but I wouldn't classify it as an esport event. But yes, we have seen virtual races, and they drove quite good viewership. And here we open up another topic, which is when you have simulated driving, then the skills of the driver directly translates from real life to a game setting. And in that case, for example, virtual races can be even more interesting compared to real life racing, because in a virtual setting, you take off a very important factor, which is the one that you could die. So without the fear of dying, we saw, I was watching the virtual Grand Prixes, and the driver were taking even more risks. So the races were even more interesting. But for example, when you see FIFA, of course there's FIFA, there's esports for football games, but you don't see a direct translation of the physical abilities that require to play football to a video game. Whereas Charles Leclerc or Lando Norris, they were actually good drivers in real life. They were also good drivers in the esport, in the sim esport.
Because they use like a steering wheel and pedals and everything, so it really
exactly. It was just like
experience.
driving a car, but without the risk of dying.
It's actually wild for people who don't know. In the whole sim racing is its own universe, and you really have setups that run into thousands and thousands of euros that a lot of these guys really buy. You know, they start with I'll go cheap. I'll get €100 steering wheel and €100 pedals, and it becomes €500 pedals and an €800 steering wheel, and then you need the feedback thing. Ends up being like more expensive than any of their other equipment. But people who are passionate about sim racing are really passionate about it, and you can really do a great job of recreating the real world effect. So it makes translating real world skill into an esport really seamless in a way that doesn't exist with other games.
Yeah, and actually, I think that the sim racing case study with regards to VR is really interesting, because even though it really isn't anywhere near the strongest as far as viewership, even among kind of simulation sports, there's really that legitimacy that like bleeds through and through. And even to play like the kind of games like iRacing, you really have to invest a lot of money and time into it. So already you have an extremely dedicated audience base. But what's interesting is I actually went to a rally event in Finland last year, and there was a massive sim racing presence, massive esports presence, way bigger than what I anticipated. And a lot of these motorsports organizations are already using simulation racing as a way to kind of draw in younger audiences. And WRC is a case study in this, because they have a game that is extremely, pretty successful as far as organization-based games go. So their strategy is extremely advanced.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And we've also seen drivers being recruited, drivers that were primarily drivers on the game part that actually became real life pros. Just as the other way around, where we saw Charles Leclerc being a top Formula One driver, becoming the first guy to win the first virtual events.
Yeah, and even the most interesting I've seen is they hosted like a retired legends sim racing event where they basically had all these retired F1 drivers racing in F1 again. And I mean, there's so much opportunity there, right? For people who are a bit too old for the intensity of F1, but still legends in their own right. This is their space. This is the medium for them.
As you can tell, the team here is very excited about sim racing.
Yes.
All right, so I think we have time for one more question before we wind down and wrap it up. And I think it's one that's kind of pretty hot right now, which is the console launches. We've been hearing a lot about it, about the huge success, about some of the challenges. If you could, JJ, if you could give us some color on all of it, what's going on there, the new consoles, what's happening, why are they in demand, how's it going, all of that.
Yeah, well, it's pretty intense. I mean, to anybody who's been following, demand for this console generation has been absolutely insane, even with all the kind of financial insecurity in the world right now. Like you might expect that people aren't investing tons of money into new hardware, but they are, and we're seeing kind of record-breaking console launches for both Xbox and PlayStation. I think PlayStation yesterday broke the all-time record for most consoles sold at launch, and they managed to sell out their entire inventory. So now they're kind of trying to scrap together some new inventory because the demand is still massively high. And I think that this really goes to show the excitement and the adoration that's been generated for the games industry, or for gaming in general during the pandemic. I mean, I think people have really started to develop a really strong relationship with games, and this kind of sheds some light as to how it's going to be when the lockdown subsides. And I think that this shows that people have committed a lot more to games during the lockdown. They've bought new consoles, some of them old gamers, some of them newer gamers, and we're just seeing a lot of engagement around this specific console launch. It's really interesting to see.
Has the launch been smoother than the graphics card launches? Because for color,
No.
I personally, I think the demand we've really seen the impact. I personally decided to invest for the first time in a top-of-the-line graphics card for PC, and we are now 2.5 months later, and I'm still waiting for it. So,
no, console launches have been pretty dreadful, especially in the US and the UK. I mean, I'm over in France. I'm very lucky. The government is super strict on government, and companies are really strict on fairness, and they want everybody who wants a console to have a chance at getting one. So they really tried to monitor things like bots or people buying like double consoles. And in the US, it's a bloodbath. I mean, within a minute of the consoles going up for sale, they're all gone, and then 2 weeks later, you'll have some account on Twitter posting like 100 PS5 boxes. So there's very questionable kind of situations in some markets, but overall, I mean, the excitement is still there. The demand is really real. Unfortunately, some scalpers have gotten their hands on it, but I think if anything, this is a lesson for Sony and Xbox in kind of planning demand. And I think that they were really restricted by production in the pandemic. They did say publicly that they weren't really being affected and that they'd be able to meet their goals. But I do think that had there been no pandemic, they might have been able to squeeze out a couple extra million models units.
Cool. All right, so I think that's all we have time for. I want to thank the panelists, Luca, Jeremy, I guess myself, and also the audience for coming and watching. Really appreciate it. It's been fun, and hopefully we'll all see each other again soon.
Yep, thank you so much, and everyone have a good rest of your day.
Likewise, thank you.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. Bye.